Good morning, and for those who are here with us, thank you for joining us for this session with Jeev Kiriella from Merck. To start, Jeev, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And I think I am sitting on the mic.
Okay,
There you go.
great. Yes, so I'm Jeev. I work at Merck in the commercial division. What that means is Merck has four main divisions. One is research, one is manufacturing, another is animal health, and the fourth is commercial. And within commercial, we have a centralized data science team at the global level. And within that team, we have an AI capability function, which I lead.
Awesome. For those who are not familiar, what are the key challenges? You're working the pharmaceutical industry, so privacy and security are incredibly important. How do you deal with that in a marketing function with regards to collecting and analyzing data?
hmm I think where we think of analytics as a whole with providing value to the business, it's being able to work with analytical data ready ready data sets. So today we purchase over 50 plus data sets. We have publicly available data sets. Bringing that all together and linking it becomes a challenge for us. And when we think about what we do in commercial, we are largely focused on solving the who can actually receive our treatments, how do we get our treatments to them? And those two questions become difficult in a cohesive manner when you have very singular data sets. So bringing that together, creating a patient journey, for example, is probably one of the biggest challenges. Then on top of that, preserving folks' privacy. So I don't want to know details about your specific journey. I want to capture some trends in which you can
Mm-hmm.
actually leverage some of our therapies. And that privacy preserving angle is deeply embedded within our analytics. So we have to go through a lot of assessments in order to make sure we're preserving privacy of the patients that we are analyzing. We have to make sure we're doing ethical AI assessments on top of that. So these frameworks, they do technically slow us down, but they also preserve and mitigate the risk the company faces.
Excellent. Many organizations are challenged by the proliferation of data sources across clouds, across providers, databases, divisions. How does Merck deal with that in light of privacy and the regulatory scrutiny you're in?
Yeah, that's a good point. So one thing where our data strategy is getting stronger. So today we are actually bringing data engineers, data scientists to the table when we're solving business use cases, and then bringing that data into a single data warehouse has been a long-term effort at Merck today. So when I talk about getting analytical ready data sets, we've put in a massive amount of effort with harmonizing all of those
Mhm.
data so that we can start to be doing analysis on those. So yeah, data does live in very different places, but we do have a team that tries to bring that all together.
And what kind of roles are there? Like, do you have data engineers who work with data scientists on that?
Yes, so our teams operate in a cross-functional manner. So every pod that we create has data engineering representation, data science representation, platform representation, and business as well. And that's the high level mix of folks that come to the table to solve a use case.
Awesome. I love that ability to bridge across teams and also the alignment that that kind of imposes. Um, how does data science kind of almost a justification? How does data science help improve marketing efforts?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big questions, right? Because there's been a lot of investment into centralizing our data science talent, expanding our data science pool. Um, and today, the next question we have to answer is it bringing value, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some wins we've had today are we've internalized the next best action platform, and we've seen improvements in engagement with our customers directly attributed to this platform. So there was some cost avoidance there, cost savings that we can capture. Now, next is how do we then start to see the improvements on actual patient journeys, right? So it's one thing with our customers who are our HCPs or healthcare providers,
Hmm.
but then down to the next level with the patients is the true goal of what Merck and most pharmas are trying to solve for. Um, so that is the next level, and we'll see. We are in that phase of actually figuring out, like, hey, is analytics bringing that impact, long term impact, et cetera? And we've centralized again an impact evaluation COE as well to just
Wow,
focus on that piece of it.
that's very
Yeah.
advanced. Um, how do you reuse some of the work that you're doing? We had some other sessions where there were questions about, so you created a model, one team can access it. Is there a possibility, like, are other groups able to see your work and reuse it? Sorry, I was, thank you. The question that I was asking was, is there potential for reuse across the company or in other groups?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for us today, we've we've also tried to attempt this, and we're just starting in this framework of reusability. What we've seen is we've had pockets of sort of data science excellence, and people are doing great stuff, but there's a question of duplication over and over
Hmm.
again. You're doing something, in Austria, they will duplicate it in the U.S., right? Because we're not talking. So what the point of the central organization is to try and capture all of those assets. When we talk about assets, we talk about reusable code utilities, we talk about ML models, we talk about simple business rules. So a lot of things that we do today are, how to identify a patient cohort, and that is a business rule for us, right?
Yeah.
So but how you do it and how one person does it should not be different from how someone else does it. So centralizing all those assets today, we have a platform we call commercial analytics reusable ecosystem, and it's just the beginning because one area we want to make sure we're doing is making sure that things are not only reusable but extensible. So I can plop it on a platform, but for me to go take it and leverage it or have some accelerator, it needs to be extensible. And so
Mm.
that's a big effort with, generalizing a lot of the code and things like that we do today.
It is critical, especially given the sensitivity of the information you deal with, to ensure the accuracy and validity of the data that you use. We see today with generative AI models, it becomes more and more difficult for companies, critical for companies to know that the data is good in order to avoid generating more garbage on the generative side. So how do you verify the collected data is correct? And do you integrate additional external data sources to improve your data quality?
Mhm. Yeah, and there's a big effort that we go through to validate a lot of the data. Also, before it even touches the business, there's a lot of effort to validate that the outputs are making sense.
Hmm.
So these are, as part of our process, our delivery process in many cases, there's steps for what we call UAT, which, the traditional software UAT. But for us, UAT is okay. Let's make sure that the data makes sense. One, let's make sure that the outputs of our processing actually are logically correct. And then we go to, and that's usually with our analytics translation team. So they also come with an analytics, mindset, but they are business facing. And then when we go to the business, we have champions at the business level or the brand teams that also validate what is coming out of it. So it's almost like a three-step process that we go through in most annual use cases before it even reaches like a production level.
You also mentioned in a prior talk about standards in the industry, that there are groups who actually give you a step ahead of that before they even sell you the information.
Um, yeah, so the idea is that like sometimes when we speak to folks, they kind of give us like that, hey, this is what to expect, like a benchmark of
Hmm.
what to expect. So many of the data providers, there's traditional data providers in pharma, like IQVIA. So many times we know like some of the benchmarks around, like let's say metastatic versus non-metastatic um, uh, patients who with cancer.
Hmm.
So we have that sort of benchmark that we can sort of validate internally with the data. But because they're one source of data, linking it with other sources like Komodo, for example, then we need to do a level of our own validation and make sure it's matching. So that it's a nice start, but we have to do our own internal.
You mentioned also when we spoke how you embed privacy across your process. Can you just share a little bit more information about that?
Sure. Yeah. So every major project that we deliver has a privacy impact assessment, and it's like a 50-point questionnaire. And it gets submitted to a central global privacy office who then reviews it. There's several reviewers that review, and they ask questions to the product owner to ensure that we are preserving privacy. And one example is specific back to the next best action system is that for every country where we've deployed this system, we have to actually we create a privacy notice and notify every customer that we will be profiling using their data. And we have to make clear that they have an opt-out mechanism on top of that. So so if they come back and they say, hey, I don't want you to use my data, and I want you to delete everything, we have to be able to do that behind the scenes. So that is a process that we go through for all of our major initiatives, particularly using customer data or patient data.
Amazing. What role does machine learning play in addressing all of these challenges? It sounds like you have a lot of data sets, a lot of rules to comply with. So you sound like a very good use case for artificial intelligence to overcome all of those complexities.
Yeah, I actually think this is where we want to go with machine learning. And I think about privacy preserving AI and how we can actually be at the forefront of that. Like a lot of what we do today from a governance standpoint, the muscle is there internally, right? We focus on privacy impact assessments. We do digital privacy assessments as well. So that muscle for the company is there. But the technology is, and maybe the technology is just catching up right now, right? Like when there's terms like federated learning, where you're not actually you're taking data centrally and processing it. You're kind of deploying a model on the edge.
Yeah.
That is something that I think we want to try and get to more and more. So today it's hard for us to do that, largely because the tech is not there. So we have that governance around like privacy assessments, and there's more process involved, but the technology should quickly follow.
One of the things that we heard from other speakers during the event had to do with alignment, and you touched on that. But can you tell us a little bit more about how Merck deals with that, having the business and the data people and the data scientists and potentially the people downstream, the DevOps and IT folks who need to deploy the models? How do you align between those groups?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And all of our models have a central product owner. So this can be from various angles, depending on the bend of the actual use case. Like in some instances, it can be the business engagement team. They might act as product owner. In some cases, it might be a data scientist who has more of a tech product lens, right? So, but the mechanism by which we deliver is all the same. Like their role as a product owner is really to corral all of these different pieces and sort of define that roadmap for delivery and put it on like a timeline at the end of the day, and manage that expectation as well with that timeline. And that is like a very standard process for us. And it can come from, like I said, any one of the major teams, but we always have that central product owner.
What is generally the duration of a project, or at least for the initial release? How long does that normally take if you have kind of a standard timeline?
Yeah. So a lot of it starts with the business use case, and that we allocate maybe about a couple of weeks to just figure out what are we solving for the business. Then it's a matter of data readiness. Do we have the data to answer that use case, and is it in a position to actually use? Now, depending on what that outcome is, that's what can extend the timeline, because like I said, a lot of the analytical data ready sets are not in place today. Yeah. So we have to figure out how we get to that before we even start machine learning or any advanced analytics on top of that. But typically we look at it maybe a 3-month window for delivery. That's a pretty standard delivery window for us for many use cases. And I think the process has been pretty standardized, and that's why I think we're able to achieve that.
That's amazing. Like process is definitely like the fundamental layer for repeatability. So
Right.
that's great to have that. And um, what is there a handoff process between the model readiness and even approval to IT for downstream usage? How are you doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So ultimately, what happens is most of our data science teams operate in between dev and UAT, and then from there, once in production, deploying to production is usually handled by our IT partners, and that's usually a locked environment where developers can't jump in. Obviously, I think it's pretty standard, but today that's our IT and data science sort of interaction today. So IT is with us along the way, but where they really sort of take over the whole like project, you would say, from a maintenance standpoint, is in production. So that is, and one of the things we do today is with them is they really actually help us have the best practices for deploying to production.
That's great.
So they today, as a scrappy data scientist, I might do it in like one way for one project and do it another way for another project. They'll say no, like we want to standardize this approach.
Excellent. The hand holding
Yeah.
actually nurtures the
Yeah.
collaboration. What are some of the challenges associated with predicting the effectiveness of marketing campaigns that use data science, and how do you address that?
Yeah, so on that one, I mean, we start with having folks who are analytics at the table with the marketing and brand teams, because a lot of what wants to be initiated by the brand teams today, um, they're not thinking, hey, how do I perform that analytics after the fact? And one way we've kind of solved this is standardizing a taxonomy, and it's taken a lot of effort to standardize a taxonomy because we're talking globally. So marketing teams globally need to sort of have their input on how what this taxonomy looks like. Today, we're at a point where we're trying to deploy this taxonomy. So folks are actually tagging their campaigns with it. We have a content one. Folks are tagging their content with it, and that has enabled another product we've developed, which is automated tagging. So once we've gotten enough training data around tagged assets, we've now automated the labeling of these assets. And today, tomorrow, or where we are getting to, is now the analytics folks have structured data to work with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So before they didn't have that structured data to like say, hey, it was really like, okay, for this specific campaign, let me like figure out how to like analyze the specific campaign. But given that we've standardized the taxonomy now, they can do it across campaigns. They can even do it country to country comparisons. They can do region to region comparisons. So there's a lot more that's been enabled through the standardization and then ML on top of it.
That's a good
Yeah,
path.
right.
Something that came to my mind when you were talking about the data. Um, you get a data set in. How long, like, do you have policies around how long data should be preserved? Like, do you retire data over time? Uh, um, is there kind of a process around the data life cycle itself?
Yes, yeah. So back to the PIA. So in the
Mm.
PIA, we have to actually define how long we were actually leveraged. So
PIA
is
is
privacy impact assessment. Sorry.
awesome.
Yes. So that one is we actually have to define how long we will use a customer's data,
Mm.
and typically it's a three. We have a cap at 3 years. So what that means is like all of our models. It's like when we talk about a historical interaction data set, it's up to 3 years we'll use your data, and that's rolling constantly. So every time we retrain, we go 3 year back window and use that data. So yeah, that's roughly the our guidance that we get from our our global privacy office.
Awesome. Um, one of the challenges for people in your role is is like nurturing the team, making sure people do interesting stuff. How do you sustain team interest, and how do you develop the team and encourage them to stay with the company in an industry that's very, very competitive.
Yeah, yeah. So most of the leadership team in the analytics org come from a data science, hands-on data science background. They've been there, right? So we have that. We try to put that data science view into how our talent operates within our teams. And by centralizing everybody, the approach was to say, hey, like you can focus on a specific project. We know that that gives you a sense of purpose because we've been there, and also, but it also can get boring pretty quickly. You might just get into a state of maintenance at some point,
Yeah.
and you should be able to touch other projects as well, and innovate. So that was the purpose of like bringing all our talent in, because if you just align data scientists to one product, they will just always feel that that's all they can do.
Yeah.
So today we have folks who basically uh, span across several projects, and if they want, they can then step in and say, "Hey, I want to actually take this on further." And then we also have a space where people can innovate, and it's called our expertise hub, so they can align with business use cases to think of the next best way to use like Gen AI on a business use case, or what have you, image recognition techniques, NLP techniques, to help solve a business problem.
That's a great way to keep going.
Yeah.
What are the areas and tools, and this is our last question, looking into the future, what are the areas and tools that you and your team look to evaluate and possibly incorporate in the next year?
I think the biggest one is Gen AI, right? Everyone wants to do that. So I think for us, it's about how do we enable Gen AI at scale? We're talking about a global company, centralized team. So there's no way we can handle the demand of everyone's business use case globally. So that brings us to the conversation of LLM ops, new buzzword, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you ultimately have a source a foundational model, tune it, store those vector embeddings, source that, all that that we know about through ChatGPT, and how do we do that for many, many use cases? And so for us, it's about solving that today. That's the technology that can help us do that will be a game changer for us.
And I think one area that in my research into the topic kind of stood out, especially for an industry like yours, is the concept of generative AI helping with synthesized data. That could be that's like
Yeah.
your data sets are expensive
Right.
and sometimes they're limited. Is that something you're looking into, synthesized?
Yeah, yeah, we've talked about using synthetic data for a long time, and that
Mm,
in order to sort of augment a lot of the ML that we sort of do today. And like one example is we have a transactional database where we only see where it has when we actually called a physician. It's a very minor class if you think about a binary
yeah.
classification, right? The number of times you see that is limited. So how do we augment that? We can do traditional techniques, but maybe there's a synthetic data approach to that as well. One Gen AI example we are talking about is largely along the promo content side of things.
Hmm.
Today we spend a lot of money with outsourcing our promo content to agencies, and agencies come up with the creative for us. Can we start providing accelerators using a generated image,
Hmm.
and then reduce that life cycle process time, hopefully reducing the spend. Yeah.
That's a very interesting direction, and I think what I'm seeing on using my own experience in marketing right now is that definitely the image generation, given sufficient prompt
Yeah.
engineering and cajoling, you can get remarkable results. So it is a definitely interesting direction, and again, in a regulated industry, coming up with an image that is real looking,
Yeah.
but not an individual person, that's a huge step forward.
Exactly. And I think that's where we can actually help with the cost savings or cost avoidance, right? It's good to start folks off, and then with all the privacy and regulations involved, then you go and tweak that starter pack. But today, to start, there's a process and cost involved in that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much.